saw a familiar face walking on the avenue. Both surprised by the way we looked. The years have changed us too.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Gung Ho. It's June 23rd, 2025. I'm going to take a lighter tone now. I've been thinking for a while about doing a series of shows called board shorts. You might, or maybe you realize, or maybe you don't, but I started surfing when I was 18 years old, and it became an addiction and a passion for me. This is the introductory show. I'm going to tell you how I started and why it is so important that I did that. In my first year at Hofstra University, I was on the Hofstra University wrestling team, and we had a light heavyweight by the name of Rich Snyder. And one day after practice, he mentioned he was going surfing. And he said, "Do you want to come along?" I said, "Sure, I'll go along." And he drove out to a place called Point Lookout. I'm not sure if it's in Nassau County or still in Queens, on the Atlantic Ocean. And it was, the day was very hazy, it was drizzling. He put on a diving suit, not a wetsuit, a diving suit, and he went out in the water and he surfed with these other guys, and I was just amazed to see this. He came back in after a while, and Rich was like over 6 foot. And the surfers had built a little fire on the beach. And he said to me, "Joe, you want to try this?" I said, "Sure, I'll try it." He took off that diving suit, because there were no wetsuits. I put on the diving suit and I paddled out. And I was just amazed at what was going on. I was hooked immediately. Back then, there were no surf shops. This is 1961. No surf shops. But there was a place in Queens called Emilio's Ski Shop where you can order a surfboard. And I did some homework, and there was a surfer out there by the name of Phil Edwards, a very famous surfer. And he had a model, the Phil Edwards model. It was a Hobie. Hobie was making surfboards, Hobie Alta. And you could order a Phil Edwards model through Emilio's Ski Shop. You go there, you order the board, and you give them the specifications. And about 2 months later, the board would come. Go back to the shop, and you get the board. This is 1961. I had a Phil Edwards, Hobie Alta Phil Edwards model. It was beautiful. And I surfed on that board until I went to Vietnam. But I believe it was in 1964, Endless Summer came out, and the distribution wasn't that wide on the East Coast. It was playing in Manhattan. I went to see it. I really liked it. In 64, I was just hooked. There was no such thing as wetsuits. There was no such thing as surf wax. There was no leashes. The boards were heavy and big. We bought diving gear from a shop in Queens. We used the diving gear to surf during the winter. It wasn't made for surfing. It would rip open, but that didn't deter us. So it's just a few of us. We surfed everywhere we could. Most of the time in the Rockaways, in Atlantic Beach, Gilgo. And then one day we were at a place called The Gate outside of Breezy Point. Breezy Point was a private community, a gated community. You weren't allowed to go in there, but we were at the gate, and I was looking, I guess, south, and I said, "There's waves breaking down there. I see waves breaking." So one of the guys there with us was a Breezy Point resident, and he could go down to the point. So we piled all our boards on top of his car, and we rode down to the end of Breezy Point. Now, Breezy Point is the very end of Long Island. The Verrazano Straits are right next to it. We started driving his car toward the beach, but now we realized we were in a national park. And we drove as far as we could, and because of the depth of the sand, we couldn't go any further. So we got our boards and we started walking towards the ocean over sand dunes. And all of a sudden, I saw the tops of the waves being blown offshore. And I knew that we were going to hit some really good surf, and we did. It was like maybe 6, 8 feet. Perfect conditions. We surfed until we dropped, literally, until we couldn't surf anymore. We thought we had discovered Breezy Point. After that day, other surfers joined us. But one day, while we were surfing, an older man came to us, and he says, "You guys think you discovered this point, this break?" "No." He says, "I was here in 1935. Duke Kahanamoku was here." And he says, "Follow me back to my cottage." So we followed him back. He had a cottage on the beach, actually a few hundred yards from the beach. And he took us below the cottage, and below the cottage he had surfboards from the 30s. Surfboards from the 30s. He had a Blake surfboard that was very thick. It even had things to drain them. He was a retired cop. So we were just crazed. Kept surfing. And then finally, another story. I thought at the time, I was 61, I was 18 years old, and at 19, 20, I was 20. I thought I was invincible. I was in great shape. I was strong. I was, and I would surf by myself a lot. Remember now, no leash, heavy boards, whatever the conditions were. If it was surfable, we would paddle out, and sometimes it was really big surf in the winter. So when I was, I guess, about 19, my family moved back to Brooklyn from Massapequa, and I moved back to Brooklyn with them. So I would get up early in the morning. I had a Volvo, a P544, and if I put the front seat down, I could slide my Hobie right into the Volvo, and close the trunk, and the board was there, and go surfing. So my routine was, I would drive from Brooklyn, Canarsie. I would drive over to the Rockaways. I would surf by myself, and then I would go make my first class at Hofstra University. This one particular morning, I got there. I went up on the boardwalk. I checked the surf. It looks like it was like 3 to 5 foot, but the wind was offshore. It was good. There was no one else out. So I went back. I put this time what I had was what they call, I think they called it a muskrat top. It was a top that covered down to your waist, and it had like a flap or a tail, and you pulled it up and you buckled it on your waist. So I had this muskrat vest on. We called it muskrat, and a pair of cut off. There were no baggies back then. We surfed in cut off Levi's. So I decided to paddle out, and I positioned myself between two jetties. They were hundreds of yards apart, and I paddled straight out. And I realized right away that the white water was pretty powerful. And I would go through the white water, keep paddling, go through the white water, keep paddling. These were waves that were coming in. And I realized that it was bigger than I thought. So I just kept going, and I paddled over a wave before it broke. And usually what happens is the waves come in 4 sets. The biggest wave is the last wave. So I thought, I'll wait for the biggest wave, but I had to keep paddling out so I wouldn't be closed out. So I kept paddling. I'm very strong. I'm paddling. Up the first wave, down. Up the second wave, down. Up the third wave, down. Now the fourth wave is coming. And I'm looking at it, and I'm going to paddle, Actually, I decided I'm going to paddle over it because it was like forming up so fast that I really couldn't take off. I was too far inside. So I started paddling up, and I went straight up. I had 9.6 Hobie, 9.6 Phil Edwards, 9.6. Started going straight up, and the top of the wave was still above me and just about to break. Now, I thought I could handle this, so I grabbed my board. We call it going turtle, I guess. I just wrapped my arms and my legs around my board, and I went over the falls. And I held on to that board, and I was getting pummeled. The white water was so powerful. It must have been 6 feet high. I don't know. I was being pummeled, but I held on to the board. I was that strong, and it stopped. Maybe after about 30 seconds of being tossed around, I still had the board. And then it stops, and I right myself, and I'm right in front of one of the jetties. I'm like 4 feet in front of a jetty. These jetties are like 100 yards long. They're 15, 20 feet high. And there I am right in front of the jetty with my board. And I look back, and there's another set coming. And I'm going to be smashed into the jetty if I hold that board. I release the board, and I think to myself, I don't know. I go to take off the muskrat suit, and I realize no time to do that. I think about screaming, there's no one here. So I dive for the bottom. I dive to the bottom, to my right. I go down. The wave starts breaking, hitting the jetty, and I am getting pummeled, spin around, tumbled, this and that. Every once in a while, I'm able to come up and take a breath of air for the whole length of the jetty, whatever it was, 100 yards, 150 yards. But I finally make it in. My feet touch sand, and I literally crawl out of the ocean. And for the first time in my life, I'm shaking. I'm shaking. And I have a funny feeling in my belly. It's fear. I stand up, I'm breathing really hard, and my board is on the jetty. Halfway out, the waves threw my board on top of the jetty. So I went out, got my board, and I went to Hofstra, my first class. While I'm sitting in class, this guy, I was shaking. I never knew fear before. I was really shaking. My nose was dripping with salt water. My hair was full with sand. And a guy in the class by the name of Vic Sardino, I'll talk about him later, says to me, Joe, are you okay? And I said to him, yes, I'm okay, but I wasn't okay. I just realized that I was not invincible. I just experienced fear. It was a hurricane swell, turned out. That afternoon, I went back to Atlantic Beach to surf. I went there, and I looked out, and there was only 2 guys out. It was a big swell. And I said to myself, I've got to get back in the water. They were coming in, and I determined that by myself I would go back out there. And I did. But I was off. I paddled out, and I was being swept west really fast. I didn't catch a wave, but I stayed out there for a little while, and then I paddled in. So I'll never forget that day. It didn't deter me. I still would go out into big waves. Anyhow, one of the reasons I joined the Marine Corps, one of the main reasons, well, the first reason was I believed that I was going to Vietnam, and I believed that being with the Marines I had a better chance of survival because I saw all those movies with John Wayne, Sands of Iwo Jima, whatever it was. I saw all of them, and I was convinced that the Marines were special, and that was for me, and that they were, they were amphibious. They were assault troops. They were around the ocean all the time, and I'd be able to surf, which I was able to surf, but only one time in Vietnam. So I went in the Marine Corps as an enlisted Marine. Every service is divided up between enlisted and officers. I went in as a private, and I went through everything, Paris Island, which was a horror, and advanced infantry training, basic specialist training, and this was down in Camp Lejeune. I was able to go home. A friend of mine had a car and bring back a couple of my surfboards, so while I was at Camp Lejeune, I was surfing. I just was obsessed about surfing. I can't explain, but there is some type of visceral feeling when you're on a wave, a nice sized wave. It's a really good feeling. It's not, I can't explain it exactly. All right. In 1975, I was in practice now, criminal defense attorney, still surfing all the time I could. We were living in downtown Brooklyn. Me, my wife to be, Nikki, we got married in '78. We're still married, and I was surfing all the time. I had a Jeep. Because the only way you can get down to Breezy Point is if you had a four-wheel drive Jeep. I had a big Jeep, and we would drive down after work. Me and Nikki would drive down to Breezy Point, park on the beach, and I would surf. There were other surfers there. You couldn't get down there to that point unless you had a four-wheel drive vehicle. And you couldn't walk down. It was too far to walk. Well, the mosquitoes were incredibly bad. I used to say to people, the bones of surfers are strewn along the path or the road down to this point. The mosquitoes were so big and so vicious. Anyhow, we would stay on the beach many nights and then go back to work in the morning. And when I came home, I was very fortunate. Well, I was married to someone else back then. I call her my non-wife, Annette. And when I came home in July, I had orders to report to the 2nd Marine Division, and I knew that they were constantly going on what they call med cruises, so I would report to the division if I did, and I would get on another aircraft carrier and be sent to the Mediterranean. And me and Annette had only been married for 2 weeks before I went to Nam. It wasn't really such a good idea, thinking back. But I was so upset about leaving again that I drove to headquarters and Marine headquarters in Washington, D.C. with a net and our brand new Triumph. I walked into the headquarters to a Marine that was actually in charge of, drafting or making these orders, and I walked in and told him straight out, I think he was a major, look, I'm just back from Nam. I was only married a few weeks before I left. I don't want to go to the second division and ship out again. In Nam, I was on aircraft carriers and all that stuff. We did all that. And I said, I want to change of orders. And he said, all right. He changed my orders. He said, you're assigned to the Landing Force Training Command. So we drive down there, and the Landing Force Training Command is on Chesapeake Bay, and the Atlantic Ocean is just a few miles away. So I have my Hobie, and I start surfing again. Almost every day I can after work, I surf, and I surf, and I surf. And I work out, and I even start to play tennis. And it just never stopped. The funny thing was, well, it's not funny. I never spoke to my wife at the time. I never spoke a word to her about my time in Vietnam. Not one word. Nor my father, or my mother, or my friends. I would speak to other Marines on occasion. And that's the way it went for decades. But it turned out there were a lot of people, men, some women that were drafted or volunteered that went to Nam, and they were surfers. And some of them were able to surf, and when they came home, they continued to surf. What we didn't realize back then is that we were giving ourselves self-therapy. The surfing was our therapy. It was helping us to stay grounded, to stay okay. That's being in the water, out in the water and surfing. You forget about everything but surfing. It could be fun, it could be a little dangerous, but it is healthy, and that's what it was, self-therapy. I wouldn't even realize that until decades later that that's what I was doing, and that some of the surfers were doing. Anyhow, I've got a lot to say about surfing. Like I said, in 1975, me and Nikki drove out here to Montauk. I had my Hobie with me, 9 foot. Everybody was riding shortboards. And as we came down the hill to the first village where all the hotels are and everything, I could see that the waves were breaking outside. I didn't know where to surf. We had never been to Montauk. And I found a place called Trailer Park. And I pulled into Trailer Park, and there were surfers out, and it was really good. It was really good. And I was the only one out there with a longboard. Again, no leash. Nobody had leashes yet, I don't think. And I paddled out with my longboard. I surfed the whole day. And there was a girl out there, and she said to me, "It's not fair. You were able to sit out further and catch these waves." She was right. Everybody had switched to shortboards. Later on, the longboards would come back into vogue. And I did ride a shortboard for a while, not as short as the shortest, but I did. So surfing and my buddies played a very important part of my life. I met people out there surfing in the water. A lot of people you would know, like Rusty Drum. I met him out there. He was a famous writer for the Star. Um, I met Alan Weisbecker, who became a famous author. He committed suicide not too long ago. I met the owner of the East Deck, Alice Hausnack. I met a lot of people, made a lot of friends, and was able to help a lot of people because I was a defense attorney, a lot of surfers. So I was in the city not too long ago with a guy by the name of Roland Eisenberg. Some people will remember him. He ran the Blue Parrot in the village of East Hampton for a long time. Terrific surfer, I mean, really famous surfer. He was on the, Dewey Weber team. Dewey Weber was making surfboards, and he was on the team in the 60s. He was surfing at Gilgo Beach, same time I was surfing. He was incredible. We became really good friends out here. I'll talk about him more, but actually it was with him one day, went to visit him in Manhattan, and we were talking about surfing, and I said, you know something, I'm thinking of doing something. I'm going to call it Board Shorts, and I'm going to do a show about you someday. And he liked that, and someday I will talk about him. In any event, surfing has been really good to me. I was in the water last year. I'll be back in the water again, but I've had some things happen to me. Bad hip, operation on my hip, open heart surgery. So surfing has become very difficult, but I'm not going to give up. I just won't give up. And but I will try to make the transition now to stand-up surfing. All right, my introductory show, I'm going to invite some of my friends on soon. Take care. Bye.
I saw a familiar face walking on the avenue, both surprised